the government has a long history of exploiting the land and people of the volunteer state for their own gain. The proposed building of the ICE detention center, is just a new example of the abuse that the South is expected to take.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Charity Tyler of Tullahoma, Tennessee, who we heard up top. Tyler was one of dozens of alarmed residents who turned out last month to speak forcefully at a Wilson County Commission meeting against a giant immigration detention center that was reportedly being considered for the area. The politics of that controversy, which eventually included intervention by Tennessee Senator and gubernatorial candidate Marsha Blackburn, revealed a lot about how the Trump administration's mass deportation and detention program is being received on the ground. Which is to say, not well, even in some very red states and counties. We'll dig into that uproar and hear more voices from that meeting coming up. Also, in our Arts and Culture segment, we'll look at an exhibit in Atlanta of works by a legendary Kentucky photographer. But first, the news roundup. And the news this week is all about elections. There were several notable primary contests across the South last week, and they offered some interesting insights about the 2026 electorate on both the left and right. As always, you can find links to sources and coverage in the show notes. We'll take a look specifically at some elections in Arkansas, North Carolina, and to start us off, in Texas. The big ticket races were the Republican and Democratic primaries for the U.S. Senate seat, currently held by Senator John Cornyn. And big ticket is a literal phrase here. At a combined $122 million across both parties, it was the most expensive Senate primary in history. Most of that money was spent on the Republican side, where Cornyn, who has held the seat since 2002, faced a strong challenge from scandal-plagued and pugilistic State Attorney General Ken Paxton. So strong that the race isn't even over yet. Cornyn won about 42% of the primary vote, with 41% going to Paxton, and 13% going to Houston Congressman Wesley Hunt, who effectively played spoiler and stopped either of the top two candidates from winning more than 50%. That means Cornyn and Paxton are headed for a runoff in May. Republican intramural fights have become somewhat hard to categorize in the MAGA age because they're often not along familiar lines of more moderate establishment candidates versus what we used to call conservative firebrands. There are precious few moderates of any kind left in Republican leadership, particularly in the South. They are mostly varieties of conservative and reactionary. So the differences often come down to personality and temperament. On those grounds, the Cornyn-Paxton fight is between a more conventional statesman model and a performative populist model. Paxton brings a lot of baggage with him. He's been accused of both public corruption and private misconduct, and his wife, Texas Republican State Senator Angela Paxton, filed for divorce last year amid highly publicized accounts of his extramarital affair. Paxton survived an impeachment attempt by the state legislature in which many Republicans voted against him. But he's also made a national name for himself as an ideologically aggressive attorney general. He led a multi-state lawsuit after the 2020 presidential election seeking to throw out results from other states that had voted for Joe Biden. He went on to file 50 different lawsuits against the Biden administration, establishing a model of national partisan combat that many other state attorneys general, of both parties but especially Republicans, have emulated. Cornyn, a staunch conservative, a former judge and former state attorney general himself, has long established ties with Republican business leaders in Texas. And he has most of the money behind him in this race. He massively outspent Paxton in the primary by about $70 million to $4 million. Even Wesley Hunt spent more than Paxton did, illustrating the depth of Paxton's appeal among the more hardcore MAGA elements of the party. The ones who want to see more fights and fireworks. The race is significant enough that President Donald Trump quickly signaled that he would be stepping in with an endorsement, which he had withheld throughout the primary. He posted on social media that he expected whoever he doesn't endorse to step aside for the good of the party. As of the time of this recording, Trump had not yet made that endorsement, but most observers expect it to go to Cornyn, who many think would perform better than Paxton in the general election. By last Thursday, Paxton, who will be out of a job as Attorney General at the end of this year, appeared to be looking for the best deal he could get. He posted on social media that he would drop out of the race if Republican senators would break the filibuster to pass Trump's restrictive Save America Act, designed to make it harder to vote nationwide. Obviously, all of that can change quickly, maybe by the time this episode is released. Part of the Republican concern about their divisive primary is the result of the Democratic Party's own fight for the seat. In a high-profile race that drew national attention and buzz, State Representative James Tallarico defeated Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett by a 6-point margin. It's not just that Tallarico is the candidate that many Republicans fear has the most statewide appeal. It was the number of voters who turned out for the race that raised their eyebrows. The Cornyn-Paxton contest was hard-fought and highly visible. It drew just over 2.1 million Republican voters. The Democratic primary drew about 150,000 more, suggesting a highly motivated party base. Tallarico and Crockett have both been touted as fresh Democratic faces in recent years, generating viral video moments in their respective seats and showing facility with social media. They also represent two different models, with Tallarico evincing a kind of high-minded earnestness grounded in his Christian faith, and Crockett a sharp-tongued, take-no-prisoners rhetorical style. There was also the matter of race and gender, of course. Tallarico is white and male, Crockett black and female. Crockett performed best in her hometown of Dallas and in Houston, and in East Texas more generally, which collectively account for the bulk of Texas's black population. Tallarico did better in more white and Latino areas, including Austin, where he lives, and San Antonio, as well as South and West Texas. There were not huge ideological differences between Crockett and Tallarico, although for all her framing of herself as a maverick, Crockett was, if anything, the more establishment-minded of the two. She was a strong ally of Biden and defended his decision to remain in the 2024 presidential contest as long as he did. She's also been a supporter of Israel, although she was at pains in the primary to separate support for the Israeli people from support of the Netanyahu government and its war in Gaza. Regardless, the conventional wisdom in the state, and certainly among its Republican leadership, is that Tallarico is a stronger statewide candidate than Crockett, especially if Crockett's voters follow her lead in rallying behind his candidacy. Still, as much attention as Tallarico has attracted, and as divided as the Texas Republican Party appears to be, the path back to statewide office for Democrats in Texas remains rocky. As Texas Monthly political reporter Christopher Hooks put it in a New York Times opinion column last week, quote, "I think the conventional wisdom that Tallarico is a better general election candidate than Crockett is, for several reasons, absolutely correct. But he is still a very white candidate from a unique part of the state, and he doesn't necessarily have the communication skills and natural charisma of Beto O'Rourke, who had been a national celebrity for a year by this point of his race. So he's got a lot of work to do," unquote. Over in North Carolina last week, the story in the primaries was of anti-establishment and anti-incumbent backlash in both parties, but it took different forms. 3 Democratic state legislators who had attracted ire within their own party for voting with Republicans were all taken down by more progressive challengers. The most high-profile were 2 state representatives in Charlotte, the state's largest city and one of its bluest areas politically. State Representative Carla Cunningham, a conservative Democrat, has been in office since 2012 and has become increasingly at odds with the mainstream of her party, including backing a pro-immigration and customs enforcement bill last year. She was completely wiped out in the primary by progressive pastor and Bible scholar Rodney Sadler. Sadler took about 70% of the vote to just 22% for Cunningham. The picture wasn't much better for State Representative Nassif Majid. He crossed party lines last year to override a veto by Democratic Governor Josh Stein of a bill that declared there are only 2 genders and sexes in the state, male and female. Majid also joined Cunningham in overriding another Stein veto of a bill that eliminated carbon reduction goals for Duke Energy, the state's largest power provider. He lost his primary contest to Valeria Levy, a public health consultant, by another whopping margin, 69% to 26%. And in one of the Democrats' more rural seats, 82-year-old incumbent State Representative Shelley Willingham, who had, among other things, voted to allow private school teachers to go armed, lost by 8 points to Patricia Smith, a local minister. The overall picture was of an increasingly progressive Democratic electorate seeking to exercise discipline on their more centrist or conservative office holders. A few weeks ago, we talked about another interesting North Carolina race in the Raleigh-Chapel Hill area, where Democratic Congresswoman Valerie Foushee faced a strong challenge from the left in County Commissioner Nida Alam. Foushee has a generally progressive track record, but is something of an old-school Democrat. At 69 years old, she's been active in local politics for 30 years. She drew criticism from Alam and a coalition of progressive groups for her past support of Israel, from which she distanced herself during the campaign, and business interests including the AI industry. Alam first ran against Foushee 4 years ago and lost by 9 points. Last week's primary was much closer, with Foushee winning by just 1 percentage point. After conceding on Thursday, Alam still sounded something of a triumphant note, which no doubt reflected what many Democratic officials had already absorbed about the week's results. She posted, quote, "While we may not have won the race, the establishment should stay on watch. Our movement sounded the alarm for future Democratic primaries throughout this cycle," unquote. Meanwhile, North Carolina Republicans were also restive in their primaries, ousting at least 5 incumbents from state legislative seats. The most high-profile Republican primary, between State Senate Leader Phil Berger and Rockingham County Sheriff Sam Page, remains undecided, with initial returns showing Page up by 2 votes. Most of the GOP ousters seemed driven not exactly by ideology, but by ongoing voter frustration with what they see as the establishment, even though the establishment in the state legislature is already very conservative. They raise the question of whether the reactionary nature of the MAGA movement, which has really only ever defined itself as a force of opposition, makes its voters inherently hard to please, even when they're in power. The last race I wanted to mention is in Arkansas. This wasn't a primary, it was yet another special election to fill a vacant seat, and it made the 9th straight special election across the country since Trump took office last year, in which voters flipped a seat from Republican to Democrat. Democratic candidate Alex Holliday's win in the 70th State House District outside Little Rock wasn't exactly surprising. He ran for the seat in 2024 and came within 2 points of beating Republican Carlton Wing. Wing, maybe sensing the way the district was shifting, it actually voted for Kamala Harris in the same election that he barely won, resigned to take a job running Arkansas PBS, which he was appointed to by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. That created the vacancy. Sanders actually tried to delay filling it until the end of the state legislative session, but Arkansas Democrats sued, and a judge ordered the election to go on the March 3rd ballot with the state's primary races. Holliday defeated Republican candidate Ben Renshaw by a solid 60-40 margin. It won't make much difference in the state House, where Republicans have an 80-19 supermajority, but it continues a trend that has Democrats feeling energized about the rest of this year's elections. Okay, now we're to the great ICE pushback. This is, in a way, a part 2 to last week's report about the private prison company CoreCivic and its profit-driven expansion of immigration detention under the Trump administration. As you may recall, CoreCivic's corporate leaders were bullish on the mass deportation and detention program being undertaken by ICE, with hopes of filling more than 10,000 more beds with imprisoned immigrants this year. They didn't talk at all about the growing public disenchantment with ICE and the Border Patrol, particularly after agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis in January who were peacefully observing their operations. But that disenchantment is real. A Marist poll last month found that 65% of Americans thought ICE had, quote, gone too far in its aggressive enforcement. Last week, even a Fox News poll found that 58% of Americans disapproved of ICE's performance, compared to 42% who approved. The approvals are almost entirely among Republicans and people who identify as MAGA supporters. And even they, it turns out, only approve of it under certain conditions. As ICE has sought large warehouse properties around the country to convert into new detention centers, including several around the South, it has run into public opposition over and over. Of 23 proposed warehouse sites so far, only 9 have completed deals, according to Courier News. 7 are still at the proposed stage, and 7 have been denied or blocked, usually by local residents and authorities. For example, in Ashland, Virginia, at the end of January, more than 500 people gathered at a meeting of the Hanover County Board of Supervisors to protest a planned sale of a local warehouse to ICE. The county, just north of Richmond, voted 62% for Trump in 2024. But the county board that night formally stated its opposition to the sale, even though they said they had no direct control over it. The public pushback eventually compelled the warehouse's Canadian corporate owner to cancel the deal. The Department of Homeland Security has already purchased a warehouse in Social Circle, Georgia, a small town of about 5,000 people 45 miles east of Atlanta. ICE plans to use it to hold up to 10,000 detainees. Local officials only found out about the plans from a Washington Post story in December. Social Circle is also a Trump voting town, but local residents are fiercely opposed to the project, which they say will overwhelm existing infrastructure, especially water and sewers, and could hurt local employers by hiring away the town's small pool of workers. Local Republican officials have joined with Democratic Georgia Senators John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to try to block the plan. Warnock toured the warehouse with residents last week and told reporters, quote, "This town voted overwhelmingly for President Trump. I think they deserve better answers than they're getting from the DHS department so far," unquote. And then there's Lebanon, Tennessee. It's not on the list of proposed sites because, with the intervention of a high-ranking Republican, it was never officially proposed. Here's what happened. On February 13th, the Tennessee Lookout reported that ICE confirmed it had purchased a facility for a detention center in Lebanon, the county seat of Wilson County, about 30 miles east of Nashville. There were few details available, but the story set off alarms among local residents. Wilson County is solidly Republican territory that voted 69% for Trump in 2024. It's home to about 150,000 people. It's about 80% white, with a median household income around $95,000. Local officials told constituents and reporters that they were caught off guard by the report. They were even more confused a few days later when ICE officials reversed themselves and said they hadn't actually purchased property yet, but were just considering it. That was the state of affairs on February 17th, when the Wilson County Commission gathered for its regular monthly meeting. The room was packed with people wanting to ask questions and offer opinions about ICE coming to town, almost all of them critical. At the start of the meeting, County Mayor Randall Hutto thanked people for coming out, but reiterated that neither he nor the members of the commission really had any information about the proposal.
You come to speak. We're willing to listen to you. But I do want you to know what I know about this situation. I was contacted earlier in the week that there was a possibility of an ICE facility coming to our county. So I reached out to the sheriff, and the sheriff said, "I have no clue of what you're talking about."
He also said the local government would have little authority to stop any such development.
So I really do not know if they're coming or not. This body tonight can listen to your comments, but they have no vote and no say-so in that. Your wishes are important for them to hear. I think it shows by the number of people here, probably where you stand at. I will ask you to, if you don't mind, at some point move out in the hallway there because of the fire codes that I'm sure I'm probably going to hear from here in just a few minutes.
The first of more than 40 speakers against the proposal was Paige Cook, a resident of Mount Juliet who's also a Democratic candidate for county commission this year, challenging Republican incumbent Bobby Franklin. She said local residents needed information about the size and impact of any new detention center.
What contingency plan is underway to address potential impacts on roads, utilities, emergency services? Because once a facility like this is operational, the effects are no longer theoretical. Increased transportation needs, greater strain on fire, EMS, and healthcare systems, strain on our already struggling infrastructure that is paid for by local taxpayers. Even if the federal government operates the facility, the surrounding community absorbs many of the secondary impacts.
Sabina Boer, a chemical engineering professor at nearby Tennessee Tech University, compared ICE detention centers to the ongoing struggles of the country's indigenous people. Boer is a Native American and a member of the National American Indian Movement.
What we know is that there are an untold number of cases where people's Fourth Amendment rights have been violated in these facilities. Just as appalling are the conditions in these so-called detention centers. People are being denied their 14th Amendment constitutional rights to due process. They're not being provided with medical care or life-saving medications, and we absolutely cannot ignore the reports of physical and sexual abuse that are occurring at these facilities. Again, speaking as an Indigenous person, what is happening to communities that may have never experienced this type of injustice is not new to us. Indigenous people have been fighting this colonized system of oppression for hundreds of years.
Lifelong Wilson County resident Jack Lowry told the mayor and county commissioners that he appreciated their work and believed that the county had made big strides in recent years. But he said a huge detention center would undermine those efforts.
We are a wonderful place to make a home. We are a wonderful place to have a business. We are a wonderful place for a corporate company to come in and have manufacturing facilities, shipping facilities, and find good quality employees who will show up to work. A detention facility in our county would act as a poison pill. I trust that this county commission knows that, and that it will take the appropriate steps within the powers that it has to ensure that the world knows that we are not willing to support a detention facility in this county.
Resident Natalie Flores of Lebanon likewise questioned the idea that a large detention center could be a meaningful force for economic development in the fast-growing county, and whether it resonated with the county's own vision for its future.
We're hearing about projections of job growth and positive financial impact, but these claims are vague, they are generalized, and they're not accompanied by detailed local analysis. Economic development should strengthen a community's future. It should align with who we are and what we want to become. A detention facility does not do that.
Then there was Charity Tyler, who we heard at the start of the episode. She drove to Lebanon from Tullahoma in another county 60 miles to the south. She said she felt compelled to speak up for the immigrant residents of her community, who she feared would be the kind of people rounded up and held at such a detention center.
And my community knows that the government has a long history of exploiting the land and people of the volunteer state for their own gain. The proposed building of the ICE detention center, is just a new example of the abuse that the South is expected to take. The government has repeatedly sent our boys into battles with no regard for their welfare if they are lucky enough to come home. The government has cut VA and SNAP benefits with no regard for the veterans who rely on these systems in order to fund camps and agents that terrorize the American people.
Resident Erin Moore took a more measured tone, saying that she supports the mission of ICE, but then offered a withering critique of its recent operations that suggested how much support the agency has lost from people inclined to back it.
I absolutely believe in incarceration and deportation of violent foreign nationals. I support measures of border control to keep the residents of this country safe. We can have those things without endangering and disrupting the lives of U.S. residents. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been guilty of assaulting, detaining, and violating the rights of U.S. citizens, migrant workers with valid work visas, and families seeking safety and opportunity through asylum. We do not need or want that level of violence or chaos in our communities.
An Asian American woman named Taylor Eshe said for the first time in her life she was worried about her family members, who are all legal U.S. residents. To her, the proposed detention center was one mechanism of a whole system being constructed to intimidate and even incarcerate people like them.
And now I'm having conversations with my mother and my family about what to do if they get stopped, despite being legal citizens. I have traveled from Nashville to make this request on Lunar New Year Day, on a day I should be celebrating with my family and my community. I am forced instead to advocate for them instead. My extended family has experienced life and internment camps, and we are seeing history repeat in real time. Legal status alone will not keep us safe. I'm having conversations, and now we are seeing more and more the increase of ICE activity does not just endanger people of color, it endangers all of us. And when they stop coming for us with melanin, they're going to come for you too.
Many others spoke. A doctor, a combat veteran, local high school students, a woman in her 70s, a pastor, a naturalized citizen, the chair of the Wilson County Democratic Party. The final speaker was Ron Ostreicher, who said that he had moved to Wilson County 8 years ago. He identified himself as Jewish.
I grew up with relatives that had numbers tattooed on their arms from being in the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. I heard all of their stories growing up. As a boy growing up in New York City, I went to school with some other kids who were refugees from the former Soviet Union. I heard their stories. I'm very much against this ICE detention center, whether it's actually happening or whether it's a rumor, but I came here tonight because one of the things that I was raised with was the idea that evil flourishes while good men do nothing.
The public forum lasted more than 2 hours. There was only one speaker who said he supported ICE's work, although even he said federal agents should be held accountable for any offenses they commit. Most of the crowd left, and the county commission continued with its normal business, issuing proclamations and deciding on rezoning requests. During the public forum, some residents chided commissioners for looking at their phones or not paying attention to the speakers. But their words clearly had an impact. After the meeting, Hutto, the county mayor, told the Nashville Scene, quote, "I can't see a positive impact from this whatsoever." Later that week, Hutto finally received confirmation that ICE was indeed considering a site in the county for what officials called a mega center, which would hold up to 16,000 prisoners. It would be the largest ICE detention center in the country. But by then, opposition had spread from members of the community to their elected representatives. Besides Hutto and Lebanon Mayor Rick Bell, that included State Senator Mark Pody and State Representative Clark Bell, all of them Republicans. They leveraged their positions to bring in a maybe unexpected ally, U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, a fierce supporter of Trump and of ICE, who is also running for governor this year. She lives just a few counties over from Wilson County. By the next Tuesday, just 1 week after that commission meeting, Blackburn posted this on her social media accounts, referring to the Department of Homeland Security. Quote, "DHS has confirmed the agency will not move forward with a proposed ICE facility in Wilson County." But unlike almost all of the speakers at the commission meeting, she added, quote, "I appreciate Secretary Noem's commitment to finding the best possible location for a new detention center to continue ICE's great work to apprehend, detain, and deport illegal aliens." So Blackburn's problem was not with what ICE does or what it plans to do in warehousing tens of thousands of people across the country. The problem was just that Wilson County, a county full of white Republican voters, was not the place to put it. In other words, Blackburn was practicing detention center NIMBYism. She didn't want it in her backyard, and her fellow Republican officials didn't want it in theirs. The problem ICE is encountering these days, though, is that everywhere is somebody's backyard. The photographer Ralph Eugene Meatyard did not particularly consider himself a Southern or regional artist, but we can claim him anyway. Born in Illinois in 1925, Meatyard moved to Lexington, Kentucky with his wife after World War II for a job with a local optician's office. The office, it turned out, also sold photographic equipment, and after his son was born in 1950, Meatyard purchased his first camera in order to take baby pictures. It quickly became a hobby, and then eventually a serious art pursuit. Mostly self-taught, Meatyard developed a distinctive narrative approach to photography. He had subjects, often members of his family, pose with props like masks and dolls, often in incongruous settings like run-down houses or suburban yards. His photos are surreal, playful, but disquieting. In 1961, he told an interviewer, quote, I work a great deal in romantic surrealist as well as abstract, for I feel that more real than real is the special province of the serious photographer. Meatyard connected with other serious thinkers of different kinds in Kentucky. He and the great writer Wendell Berry collaborated on a 1971 environmental conservation book called The Unforeseen Wilderness, about Kentucky's Red River Gorge. He was also friends with the influential Catholic monk and writer Thomas Merton, who lived at the Abbey of Gethsemane, just an hour or so from Lexington. Meatyard died relatively young of cancer at age 46 in 1972. His reputation as a visionary photographer has only grown in the subsequent half-century. And for the next few months, you can see a collection of his work all in one place. The High Museum of Art in Atlanta has acquired all 36 prints from Meatyard's first monograph and is displaying them through May 10th in a show called The Family Album of Ralph Eugene Meatyard. It's a chance to inhabit Meatyard's imagination and appreciate his technical invention. By the way, if you're wondering about his distinctive surname, Meatyard is a fairly uncommon name with deep British roots. The meat part of it probably actually referred to meadows rather than animal flesh. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.